Speaking of supporting the Chinese totalitarianism, clearly, it's not a good idea to teach your, philosophical enemy like China, new weapons and give them bombers and tanks. Well, I can't think of a more potent weapon than capitalism itself. I often hear, my friends say, oh, well, if you give, China capitalism, the people will learn the ideas and then everything will be great there. But is it really that wise to go into China, teach them business, teach them capitalism, give them the most, productive engine ever, just so that the government that they still philosophically support can then, whenever it chooses, pull their rights back, reap in the loot that they've produced, and then continue to, oppress them and, whoever else they've set their sights on?
I mean, it depends what you mean by teach them capitalism. First of all, if we could go in and really teach them capitalism, that would be great, because then ultimately they would rebel against their government and throw them off. And so what you want is to teach them capitalism. That's unfortunately what's not being done. What you're talking about, I think, is by opening up trade with China, by them coming here and some of our professors going there and teaching in business schools and everything, we are making possible economic progress. We're making possible economic growth, which then the government can abuse to build weapons and so on. Is that?
Yeah, like investing in them, just supporting, just that kind of stuff.
I mean, this is, it's a complicated issue, particularly today. I mean, if you ask me, should Richard Nixon have gone to China in 1972? No, he shouldn't have, period. They were out-and-out communists back then. They were clearly an enemy of the United States. There was no reason to go to China and suck up to them and be nice to them in 1972. Should have American investors invested heavily in China in the 1980s? No. It was a totalitarian state. It was oppressive. There was nothing to be gained, and indeed most, if not all, American businesses who did that early on lost their money. Today, given where we are today, should Americans be investing in China? Should companies go over there? That's a much more difficult question. Because, A, China is freer than many other countries in the world. It is not clearly a direct threat and enemy to the United States. And the fact is that for some companies, or many companies, it's almost impossible to do business unless you go to China. I do some work for a company that makes suspensions for hard drives. They're in like 65% of every hard drive made in the world, from an iPod to a big mainframe. But where are the hard drives made? The hard drives are made in China. So can they say, well, we don't deal with China? I mean, that's basically them committing suicide. So it is, but on the other hand, should they move their manufacturing to China when China has no respect for property rights and therefore would steal all their property rights? No, and they're not. They keep manufacturing in the United States to protect their intellectual property. So it's a very difficult decision, I think, today of whether a U.S. company should invest or expand business into China or do business in China. And the fact is that because there's been business with China, because there's been investment with China, the Chinese economy has done better. The Chinese people, the Chinese government has freed up the economy while this investment has gone on. The Chinese people are freer today than they've ever been, probably in their entire history. They are more fascinated by what's going on in the world. They're becoming more and more interested in their own well-being and their own prosperity. And there is a chance that I do not think you can rule out that they will stand up to their government and refuse to go the fascist way. I think the biggest impediment that they have is that they don't have ideas, they don't have objectivism, they're not being taught capitalism. But there is a chance that China will end up in some kind of civil war and that the good guys, the better elements within China, will win. And you can't rule that out either. So China's tough. But I can clearly say what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't actively help the Chinese government oppress their people, which means you shouldn't be the guy with the gun. There might be gray cases where it's going to be difficult to make the call. But I can't say unequivocally that you should not be trading or buying Chinese goods or doing stuff with China. I don't think that's true.
Thank you.